there is a lake in Antarctica that has been sealed off from the rest of the world for roughly 15 million years. It sits beneath nearly 4 kilometers of solid ice, in permanent darkness, cut off from the atmosphere since before human beings existed. When Russian scientists finally drilled down and touched its surface in February of 2012, they pulled up water that had not seen the sky since the age of the earliest apes. And inside that water, they found genetic sequences that matched nothing in any database on Earth. In the Amazon basin, there is a river that boils. The water runs at 86 degrees Celsius, just below the point where it would turn to steam. Animals that fall in are cooked alive within seconds. For nearly a century, geologists dismissed the reports as jungle folklore because the standard model says a boiling river of that size should not exist where there is no volcano for hundreds of kilometers in any direction. In the mountains of central Norway, strange lights have been drifting over a single valley for more than 200 years. Since 1984, an automated research station has been photographing them, night after night, decade after decade. And after nearly 40 years of continuous monitoring by physicists and engineers, the leading scientific explanation for what these lights actually are remains, in the researchers' own words, that we do not know. In the deserts of Namibia, the ground is covered in millions of perfect circles. They are spaced with mathematical precision, arranged in a pattern that looks designed. 2 teams of scientists have been fighting over what causes them for 40 years. Neither has been able to prove the other wrong. This is our countdown of the 15 most bizarre places on Earth that even scientists cannot explain. From petrified lakes and bleeding glaciers, to ancient lines carved into the desert that we still cannot read the purpose of, these are the locations where the modern scientific method reaches its edge and quietly admits its limits. Stay with us until the end, because number 1 is that Antarctic lake, and what came up from underneath the ice has been changing what biology thinks it knows about the boundaries of life itself. Before we start, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from right now. We want to see how many countries this video reaches. Now let us begin. Number 15, Racetrack Playa in the depths of Death Valley, California. On the cracked floor of a dry lake bed, hundreds of stones sit at the end of long, winding trails carved into the mud. Some of the trails run for hundreds of meters. Some of the stones weigh more than 300 kilograms, and every one of those trails was cut by the stone itself, moving across the ground on its own. For decades, this was one of the most stubborn small mysteries in geology. No one had ever seen the stones move. They simply appeared in new positions, with fresh tracks behind them, as if the desert rearranged itself whenever human beings turned their backs. Theories piled up. Hurricane-force winds, sheets of ice, even magnetic fields and pranksters were suggested, and none of them held. The breakthrough came in 2014 when 2 researchers named Richard Norris and James Norris planted time-lapse cameras and GPS units on the playa and simply waited. Their findings, published in the journal PLOS ONE, revealed something almost stranger than the mystery itself. On rare winter nights, a thin sheet of ice forms over shallow rainwater, then breaks apart in the morning sun into vast floating panes. A breeze of only a few kilometers per hour is enough to push those ice sheets forward, and the ice in turn shoves the stones across the slick mud at speeds too slow for the human eye to register. It sounds solved, and for the ordinary stones it is. But the largest boulders, the ones weighing as much as a small motorcycle, still leave trails that the delicate ice shove mechanism struggles to account for. The wind is real. The ice is real. The precise force needed to move the heaviest stones is still, quietly, in question. Number 14. The Rainbow Mountains of Zhangye-Danxia in Gansu Province, China. Across a landscape of rolling hills, the earth itself has been painted in stripes of crimson, gold, turquoise, and deep violet. The bands run in parallel lines across entire mountainsides, as smooth and deliberate as if an artist had layered them with a brush. Photographs of the place are so saturated that people routinely accuse them of being faked. They are not. The broad explanation is understood. Over roughly 24 million years, layers of red sandstone and mineral-rich sediment were laid down, buried, and then buckled upward by the same tectonic collision that raised the Himalayas. Iron oxides painted the reds and yellows. Trace minerals added the greens and blues. Wind and rain then stripped away the surface to expose the cross-section. What remains difficult to explain is the sheer regularity. The color bands hold their lines across kilometers of terrain, with a consistency that geology rarely produces at this scale. The precise sequence of climate, chemistry, and erosion that stacked these particular pigments in this particular order across such an enormous area has never been fully reconstructed. We can describe what we are looking at. We cannot fully replay the machine that built it. Number 13. The Eternal Flame Falls, in Chestnut Ridge Park, western New York. Behind a curtain of falling water in a small grotto in the rock, a flame burns. It is roughly 20 centimeters tall, orange and steady, and it sits directly beneath the cascade, sheltered in a pocket of stone. It has been burning on and off for a very long time. When it goes out, hikers simply light it again, because the gas that feeds it never stops seeping from the rock. Natural eternal flames exist elsewhere in the world, and most are fed by extremely hot, deep geological processes that break down organic material into methane. That is the textbook mechanism. And this is where the eternal flame falls becomes a genuine scientific puzzle. In 2013, a team including geologist Arndt Schimmelmann of Indiana University studied the site and published their findings in the journal Marine and Petroleum Geology. They discovered that the shale beneath the falls is nowhere near hot enough to produce methane the standard way. The rock here is relatively cool, yet it is releasing a steady stream of gas anyway. The conventional model of how this gas should form simply does not apply. Something else is generating the fuel, through a process the researchers admitted they could not fully account for. A small flame behind a waterfall, quietly breaking the rules of its own chemistry. Number 12. Lake Natron in northern Tanzania. From above, it looks like a wound in the earth, its surface swirling in shades of blood red and rust. The water reaches temperatures of up to 60 degrees Celsius, and its alkalinity is extreme, with a pH that can climb above 10.5, close to that of household ammonia. It is one of the most caustic bodies of water on the planet. The lake gained worldwide attention through the photographer Nick Brandt, who documented the bodies of birds and bats found along its shores. The animals had died and then been perfectly preserved, calcified into stone-like statues, wings and beaks intact, frozen in the exact posture of their final moments. The images looked like something from a nightmare. The chemistry behind the preservation is understood in outline. The lake is fed by mineral springs loaded with sodium carbonate, the same compound the ancient Egyptians used to mummify their dead. When an animal dies in or near the water, those minerals rapidly replace and encase its tissue. What remains genuinely strange is the lake's behavior as a whole. It is one of the only places on Earth where the lesser flamingo will choose to breed, raising its young on a caustic, scalding surface that kills nearly everything else that touches it. A body of water that turns birds to stone, and that the same species of bird has decided is the safest nursery on the continent. The full logic of that paradox has never been cleanly resolved. Number 11. The Hum. And this one has no single address because it has been reported from every inhabited continent. It begins as a low, droning vibration, somewhere at the very bottom of human hearing, like a distant idling engine that never switches off. Roughly 1 person in 20 can hear it. To everyone else in the same room, there is only silence. Those who hear it describe losing sleep, losing focus, and slowly losing their composure, because they cannot make it stop and they cannot make anyone else believe it is there. It has been recorded in Taos, New Mexico, in Bristol, England, in Windsor, Ontario, and in dozens of other towns, and in each place investigators have searched for an industrial source and largely come up empty. In 2004, the geophysicist David Deming published a review of the phenomenon in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, cataloging the reports and concluding that no single universal cause could account for all of them. Some cases have been traced to specific machinery, many others have not. The most honest description of the global hum, after decades of investigation, is that a fraction of humanity is hearing something real, in a range that our instruments do not consistently detect, and we still cannot say for certain what it is. Number 10. Blood Falls, on the Taylor Glacier in Antarctica. Out of a wall of pure white ice, a stream of deep rust-red liquid pours down onto the frozen ground, staining the glacier like a slow hemorrhage. When explorers first found it in 1911, they assumed red algae were coloring the water. They were wrong. The color comes from iron, and the source is far stranger than anything growing on the surface. Beneath the glacier lies a lake of ancient brine, sealed off from air and sunlight for more than 1 million years. The water is so salty it cannot freeze, and it is saturated with iron. When it finally escapes through a fissure and meets the open air, the iron oxidizes and the falls appear to bleed. That much has been worked out. In 2017, researchers including Christina Carr and Aaron Pettit traced the plumbing of the system and published their results in the Journal of Glaciology. But the real mystery lives inside that hidden brine. In 2009, the microbiologist Jill McCookie led a study published in the journal Science that found an entire ecosystem thriving down there, in total darkness with no oxygen and no light. The microbes survive by metabolizing iron and sulfur, running a chemistry that most textbooks said could not sustain a community of living things. They have been sealed beneath the ice for over 1 million years, evolving in isolation, and they are still alive. How they have persisted for so long, in such an impossible place, remains one of the open questions of polar biology. Number 9. The Devil's Kettle on the Brule River in northern Minnesota. The river reaches a rock formation and splits in two. Half of it continues downstream toward Lake Superior, exactly as a river should. The other half pours into a deep pothole in the rock and vanishes. It simply disappears into the ground and does not visibly come out anywhere. For generations, this drove people to distraction. Visitors threw in logs, ping pong balls, and gallons of brightly colored dye, then raced downstream to watch for anything to resurface. Nothing ever did. The objects went into the Kettle and were never seen again, which fed decades of theories about hidden caves and underground rivers running to the lake. In 2017, hydrologists with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources took a more careful approach. They measured the volume of water flowing into the Kettle and compared it to the flow just below the falls, and the two numbers matched almost exactly. This strongly suggested that the water rejoins the river a short distance downstream, churned up so violently underground that any dye is diluted beyond detection. It is the best explanation we have, and yet the objects still never reappear. No cave system has ever been mapped to confirm the path, and the exact route the water takes through the rock has never actually been traced. The measurement says the mystery should be solved. The river has still not shown us how. Number 8. The Zone of Silence, in the Mapimi Desert of northern Mexico. Across a stretch of remote desert near the border of 3 states, travelers have reported for decades that their radios fall dead, their compasses spin, and their signals dissolve into static. The legend grew after a United States test missile went off course and crashed in the region in 1970, and it has since attracted a steady stream of visitors convinced that something in the ground here interferes with the laws of physics. The stories are dramatic. The science is more sober. Researchers who have studied the area have generally found no consistent, measurable anomaly in the local magnetic or electromagnetic fields, and have pointed out that patchy radio reception is common in remote desert terrain far from any transmitter. By the strict standards of physics, there may be nothing unusual here at all, and that is exactly what keeps the Zone of Silence on this list, because despite the debunking, the reports never stop. People keep arriving with dead radios and spinning needles and stories they swear are true, and no single investigation has ever fully satisfied either the believers or the skeptics. Whether the anomaly lives in the rocks or only in the expectations of the people who travel there, the pattern itself has proven remarkably difficult to explain away. Number 7. Socotra Island, off the coast of Yemen in the Arabian Sea. Step onto this island and you could be forgiven for thinking you had left the planet. The trees look like they belong on an alien world. The dragon's blood tree stands like a giant umbrella flipped upside down, its dense canopy held up on a trunk that bleeds a deep red sap when it is cut. When a 19th century naturalist visited in 1834, he described it as one of the strangest places on the face of the earth. Nearly 2 centuries later, that assessment has only gotten stronger. Socotra has been isolated for millions of years, drifting in warm waters far from the mainland. In that isolation, life took its own path. Roughly a third of the plant species on the island exist nowhere else on Earth. The dragon's blood tree, the bottle-shaped desert rose, and hundreds of other endemic species evolved into forms that appear almost invented. Biologists understand the broad engine at work, which is deep isolation driving unique evolution. What they cannot fully explain is why this particular island produced such an extreme concentration of the bizarre, why so many of its species took such radically strange shapes when other isolated islands did not. And the red sap, the so-called dragon's blood that gave the tree its name, has been used as medicine and dye for thousands of years, while its precise biological purpose for the tree remains a subject of study. An island that answers almost every question about isolation and evolution, except the question of why it went so much further than anywhere else. Number 6. Movil Cave in southeastern Romania near the shore of the Black Sea. In 1986, workers surveying land for a power plant broke through into a cave that had been sealed from the outside world for around 5.5 million years. No light had entered it. No fresh air had reached it. The atmosphere inside was toxic to human beings, thick with hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide and dangerously low in oxygen. By every expectation, it should have been a dead, empty void. Instead, it was teeming with life. Scientists led by the researcher Serban Sarbu descended into the poisonous dark and found more than 40 species of creatures, over 30 of them found nowhere else on the planet. Blind, colorless spiders, scorpions, leeches, and insects, all of them evolved in complete darkness, cut off from the surface for millions of years. What makes Movil Cave one of the most important places in modern biology is the foundation of that ecosystem. On the surface, nearly all life depends on the sun. Down in the cave, there is no sunlight to depend on. The entire food web is built on chemosynthesis, on bacteria that draw their energy from the sulfur and chemicals in the water and air, rather than from light. It is one of the very few ecosystems on Earth that runs almost entirely without the sun. How life first colonized this sealed pocket, and how it has sustained a stable, complex web of species in such a hostile chemistry for millions of years, is a question that scientists are cautiously still working to answer. Number 5. The Hessdalen Lights in the Hessdalen Valley of central Norway. For a few years in the early 1980s, the lights appeared as often as several times a week. Glowing orbs, white, yellow, and sometimes red, would rise from the valley floor, hover, drift along the terrain, and occasionally shoot across the sky at speeds no aircraft could match. The residents of this quiet rural valley were not imagining it. There were too many of them, seen by too many people, for too long. In 1984, a group of researchers launched Project Hessdalen, led in part by the scientist Erling Strand, and did something rare in the study of unexplained phenomena. They stayed. They installed cameras, radar, magnetometers, and spectrum analyzers, and eventually an automated measuring station that has been watching the valley for decades. This is not a case of blurry photographs and secondhand stories. It is one of the most thoroughly instrumented anomalies on the planet. And still, no one can say for certain what the lights are. Theories have come and gone: ionized dust, burning clouds of gas. One proposal suggests the lights are clusters of charged, macroscopic particles behaving like a plasma, an idea explored by physicists studying the data. Each explanation accounts for some of the observations and fails to account for others. After 40 years of measurement, the honest summary from the valley is the same one the researchers reached at the start. We are recording something real, night after night, and we do not fully know what it is. Number 4. The Fairy Circles of Namibia. Across hundreds of kilometers of arid grassland, the Earth is dotted with bare, circular patches, each ringed by a border of taller grass. There are millions of them. They are strikingly regular in size and spacing, and from the air they form a pattern so ordered it looks engineered, like the surface of another world rendered in red sand. For 4 decades, 2 camps of scientists have been locked in one of ecology's longest-running disputes over what makes them. The first theory, championed by the ecologist Norbert Jürgens of the University of Hamburg, argues that sand termites create the circles by eating the roots of grasses at the center, engineering bare patches that trap and store water. He published his case in the journal Science. The second theory, advanced by the physicist Stefan Getzen and colleagues, argues that the circles emerge from the plants themselves, from grasses self-organizing and competing for scarce water in a way that naturally produces evenly spaced gaps. His work has appeared in journals including PNAS. Both sides bring field data. Both sides have detractors. Neither has managed to disprove the other, and some researchers now suspect the truth may involve both mechanisms at once. And the Himba people, who have lived alongside these circles for generations, offer a third answer entirely. They say the circles are the footprints of the gods, termites, mathematics, or the divine. After 40 years, all 3 explanations are, in one form or another, still on the table. Number 3. The Nazca Lines, etched into the high desert plateau of southern Peru. Scratched into the reddish surface of the desert are enormous figures: a hummingbird, a monkey with a spiraling tail, a spider, a killer whale, and long, arrow-straight lines that run for kilometers across the terrain. They were made by the Nazca culture, sometime between roughly 500 BC and 500 AD, by removing the dark surface stones to reveal the pale ground beneath. Some of the figures are so large that they can only be fully seen from the air. That is the heart of the puzzle. The people who made these images could never have viewed them as a whole. They had no aircraft, no high vantage point, sufficient to take in a figure the size of several football fields. Yet the proportions are remarkably accurate. The German mathematician Maria Riesch devoted much of her life to studying and protecting the lines, and proposed they formed a vast astronomical calendar. Others have argued they were sacred pathways walked in rituals to summon water in a brutally dry land. Still others connect them to fertility and worship. None of these explanations has ever won a decisive victory, and the mystery keeps growing because the lines keep multiplying. In recent years, researchers using artificial intelligence to scan the desert, including teams from Yamagata University in Japan, have discovered dozens upon dozens of previously unknown figures, too faint for the human eye to catch. The images are real. The scale is verified. The purpose, after more than 1,000 years, is still not known. Number 2. Xanetimpishka, the boiling river of the Peruvian Amazon. Deep in the rainforest, a river runs hot enough to kill. Along a stretch roughly 6.5 kilometers long, the water reaches temperatures of around 86 degrees Celsius, and in places it churns and steams as though a fire burns beneath it. Frogs and small animals that fall in are boiled alive in moments. The Ashaninka people have known about it for centuries, treating the river as sacred, the domain of a great spirit. And for just as long, Western geologists insisted it could not be real, because boiling rivers of this size require a heat source like a volcano, and the nearest active volcano lies more than 700 kilometers away. In 2011, a Peruvian geoscientist named Andres Ruzo, then a doctoral student at Southern Methodist University, followed his grandfather's old stories into the jungle to see for himself. He found the river exactly as described. He measured the temperature. He confirmed with hard data that the legend the scientists had dismissed for 100 years was entirely true. What Ruzo also confirmed is that the heat is not volcanic. The most likely explanation is that the river sits above a deep fault system, one that draws water down into the hot interior of the earth and channels it back to the surface still scalding, a natural hydrothermal system on a scale rarely seen so far from any volcanic zone. But the precise underground configuration that produces such extreme heat, in this exact spot, remains one of the more puzzling geothermal features on the planet. The Ashaninka knew the river was there for hundreds of years. Science needed a jungle expedition and a temperature probe just to catch up to what they already knew. Number 1. Lake Vostok, buried beneath the ice of East Antarctica. It is the largest subglacial lake on Earth, a body of liquid water the size of a Great Lake, and it lies sealed under nearly 4 kilometers of ice. For an estimated 15 million years, it has been locked away in absolute darkness and isolation. Longer than our species has existed, longer than many of the animals we know today have walked the planet. It is, in every meaningful sense, an alien world hidden inside our own. For decades, reaching it was one of the great goals of polar science, and one of the great fears, because a single mistake could contaminate a pristine ecosystem millions of years in the making. In February of 2012, after years of careful drilling, a Russian team finally broke through to the lake's surface and recovered samples of the water that had frozen onto the base of their borehole. Then came the part that unsettled biology. A team led by the microbiologist Scott Rogers at Bowling Green State University analyzed the genetic material in those samples and published the results in the journal PLOS One. They found thousands of sequences of DNA, evidence of a startling diversity of life. Much of it could be matched to known organisms, including bacteria typically associated with the guts of fish and other complex creatures, hinting that this buried lake might hold a far richer ecosystem than anyone expected. But some of the sequences matched nothing. They corresponded to no known species in any database, genetic signatures from organisms that science has never cataloged, drawn from water that has been sealed away since before the first humans. 15 million years of darkness, 4 kilometers of ice, and life down there that we cannot yet name. What is living in Lake Vostok, and what it has become across all those millions of years of isolation, is a question that no biology textbook on Earth can currently answer. It is the closest thing to exploring another planet without ever leaving our own. So there they are. 15 places where the modern world, for all its instruments and all its confidence, is forced to stop and admit that it does not have the answer. A dry lake bed where stones carve their own paths through the dark. A mountainside painted in impossible stripes. A flame that burns behind a waterfall, fed by gas that should not exist. A lake that turns birds to stone, and a hum that only a fraction of us can hear. A glacier that bleeds, a river that swallows itself, and a desert where compasses are said to spin. An island of trees from another world, a poisoned cave full of life with no sun, and lights over a Norwegian valley that 40 years of cameras have failed to name. Circles in the sand that may be the work of termites or gods, ancient figures too vast for their makers to have ever seen, a river that boils without a volcano, and a lake beneath the ice-holding creatures we cannot yet identify. Every one of these places has been studied by serious people using the best tools we have, and every one of them ends in some version of the same quiet sentence. We do not know. That is not a failure of science. It is the honest edge of it, the exact line where the map runs out and the unknown begins. The Earth is far older, far stranger, and far less finished revealing itself than we like to pretend. Which of these 15 places unsettled you the most? Tell us in the comments below, and if you made it all the way to Lake Vostok, subscribe, because there are far more of these mysteries still out there, waiting under the ice, deep in the jungle, and out in the silent desert, for someone to finally explain them.